right, well, I think we can get started. I think we have a good balance here. Heather, do you want to kick us off?
That sounds good. Thank you so much, Rob. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening at our third community meeting on the Midway Plaisance project. I'll go through this evening's agenda in just a moment, but first we wanted to alert you to a few changes that we made to how we're running the virtual meeting tonight. And these are really based on some comments from our last virtual meeting that we held on this topic. So we believe we've now fixed some of the issues that some of you brought to our attention and made this feature a little bit more user-friendly for you this evening. So I want to spend a minute or so on those changes to the virtual environment that you'll see this evening. We received some feedback from the Midway PAC, thanks Midway PAC, that our last virtual meeting didn't allow folks to see who is on the call from the public side of the Zoom meeting, and that people wanted to know who else was in attendance at the meeting with them. So to fix that, if you could enter your name in the chat feature, so it's located at the bottom of your screen. And if you are affiliated with an organization, please feel free to enter that as well. And I'll pause for a minute or so here just so that you can do that before I move on. But that way you'll be able to see who is here and who's joining the meeting this evening. All right, it looks like we're getting some names here in the chat. Thank you, and we'll let people keep doing that. So we also heard that on the public side of the Zoom call, there was no ability to see the questions that people were asking, so by others in the virtual environment. So you could ask a question yourself, but you couldn't see the questions that were being asked by others. We believe we've also fixed that. So this evening, please use the Q&A tab to pose your questions at any time during the presentation, but not the chat box. Again, please pose your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll be tracking the questions so that we can answer them during the Q&A portion of the presentation. But you should be able to pose questions yourself, and you will also be able to see them in the Q&A box when other people are posing questions, so that you can see the types of questions that are being asked of our group here tonight. And then we also have Sophia Essen from site is standing by from a technology standpoint. If you are having any trouble with any of the tech on the Zoom call, you can also, rather than send a note via the chat, there's an option when you click on chat that you can actually reach out to tech support, and she'll be happy to help you with any of the technology issues that you might have. And lastly, if this is your first meeting with us, you can also go to the Chicago Park District's website, and we will drop that into the chat as well, so that you can register to get updates from us for future upcoming meetings, as well as go back and review any of the videos and presentations that we've presented on this project to help you catch up a little bit. And with that, I think we can move to the next slide and talk about the agenda this evening. So this evening, we will briefly talk about project background. Then many of you have already given us a lot of great feedback about the design and the project, which we thank you for. And so we'll review a little bit of what we heard in the community feedback section. And then we'll also move to showing you the design changes that have evolved in Midway Play and what the design updates are. So we'll spend a lot of time on that this evening. And then followed by that, we will start digging into your questions and answers and provide more details again on the process. Sarah will go through that right when we start Q&A so that we can review kind of how to do that and how we'll be answering questions this evening if you missed the introduction. And then lastly, we'll discuss next steps in the process in our Midway project here. And with that, I will turn it over to Eilish Tuffy from the Department of Planning and Development to take us to the next few slides.
Thanks, Heather. Many of you on the call have heard this before, so apologies if it's redundant, but just to make sure we cover all bases and account for anybody who might be just joining for the first time. We wanted to just lay out how we got to this point of the Midway design. And this is part of the group memorandum of agreement, the process that was kicked off due to changes in Jackson Park as part of the Obama Presidential Center. And that was designated on the National Register of Historic Places in 1972. And because of those changes and the permits that were involved, we engaged in the MOA process, the Section 106 review, which took place between December 2017 and November of 2020. During that time frame, we had 11 meetings over the 4-year period and generated a lot of ideas from community on what the mitigation measures should be for improvements to this area as part of that larger project. The draft MOA with that feedback was circulated to all consulting parties and was edited and worked over a few times, and then finalized the MOA document with the consulting parties. And that was completed, that process was completed in December of 2020. So once that process was completed, the memorandum of agreement is the legal document that resulted from all of those convenings. And at this point, we as city staff are obligated to see through the mitigation measures that were outlined in that legal document. So that's why we're here. And the next slide will show you that of those people who participated, we had 97 different consulting parties. And we're bringing everybody along throughout the process as we move through those 8 different mitigation measures, which are outlined on the next slide. And where we are now is outlined in orange, and that's the design review process for the replacement recreation space at the east end of the Midway Plaisance. So there's A through H, various steps. They're being implemented in different order, but right now we are focused on the one that's outlined in orange, and that's the design review for the Midway Plaisance. And the next slide just shows you more zoomed in the discrete area of the overall Midway that we're focused on, which is exclusively the east end, east of the railroad tracks and west of Stony Island, between the Midway. And you'll see in the far right, it's highlighted in green, and that is to outline, that's to replace the area outlined in red, which is the footprint of the new Obama Presidential Center. And the space that's there now, the team will talk about in greater depth, but it is open space, but there have been, as many of you know, some drainage issues, and the usability of the space wasn't always up to par. So this work is meant to bring that up so it's a more usable recreational space. And with that, I will pass it on to, I believe, maybe Sarah takes on from here.
Sure. Thanks, Eilish. Hi, everybody. Sarah White. You are probably also pretty familiar with this slide by now if you've been to any of our other meetings. But this slide talks a little bit about our required community engagement and regulatory reviews. So as you may be aware, we conducted 2 community meetings in the past, one on March 29th virtually and one on May 3rd at South Shore Cultural Center. And we also met with the Midway. We were invited to meet with the Midway Plaisance PAC on May 11th. So this is our 3rd community meeting in June. And we will be providing at least 2 more throughout the project process. So we intend to come back to the community kind of every step of the way as we get through design of the space. In addition, as required by the MOA, the city and the park district will make plans available for a 45-day consulting party review period. And this consulting party review period will be open for the general public, for signatories of the MOA, for invited signatories of the MOA, and for concurring parties. So keep your eyes open for that. We are meeting with our federal agency partners later this week to kind of polish up the required process to open the 45-day consulting party review period. So we're getting close to that. And once we've got more details, we will be sharing those via an email from our email list. So if you're on the email list, take a look out for that. We'll also share the information on the website. Finally, we've run through this before. The other requirement of the MOA before we can start construction is obtaining written concurrence from the Illinois SHPO that the designs are consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards for treatment of historic properties and in compliance and alignment with the requirements of the MOA. And now I think I'm going to turn it over to Rob to share an overview of community feedback and where we're at with the design. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. And thank you again for everyone that's attending tonight. It's so exciting to present here for the third of 5 community meetings. And one of the things we wanted to talk about was a little bit about some of the feedback that we've heard so far, because obviously as designers, we can't really design appropriately unless we have the proper feedback from all of you, especially when we're talking about great public spaces. And so what we try to do here is to break this down into 2 different categories. And so I'll just kind of walk you through some of the things that we heard. We kind of first about some things we need to consider as we're going through the design process. So one of the things we need to consider, obviously, I think is all citizens of the world here, is since the planet, is the effects on wildlife, right? What's going to happen with birds, other animals that might be within the space. How is this maintained? How do we consider maintenance requirements within this space? Are there specialized staff? How do you maintain the plantings? We want to make sure this is a sustainable playground and space in the future as a park space. Thoughts on proximity to restroom facilities. That's something we've talked about a lot as a team. Site access and safety. We have a little bit more in the presentation later, and some friends from CDOT here tonight to talk a little bit about that, but thinking about the drop off, the proximity to parking areas, crosswalks, things like that within the park space. We also heard we want to maintain the calmness and the serenity of the space, right? That's something that's really truly unique about this this area or this end of the Plaisance. We want to maintain the north and south embankment in their current configuration and not impede that. We want to maximize the green space and openness of the space to the greatest degree possible. Shade, super important. Gosh, I was just down by the site earlier today. This afternoon was about 98 degrees. Shade is important, and we cannot miss that. So tree cover and shade opportunities. We heard we need to mitigate the noise. The Metro can be loud, even though it's the electric right there. We also have Stony, which we have a lot of people driving on. And so want to make sure we mitigate the noise the best as possible. But this is also noise emanating from the park. We heard some concerns about that as well. We want to restore and preserve the historical character, right? That's something, again, we hear loud and clear from the community, whether that's the historic nature of the Midway Plaisance, but that's also the Cheney Good Memorial Bench as well, and the other elements that make up this great urban space. And then we want to consider this universally accessible play, right? So providing ranges and ability and varying levels of effort, all age groups. I think we heard that at the last meeting. We want to make sure that some of the older visitors can also find joy and engagement within the space. And then, providing high to low sensory spaces, which we'll get into a little bit more later. We also heard a lot of good feedback on materials and some other elements we want to touch on here, just summarize, but we want to minimize the amount of pavement and impervious surfaces, which is great to hear, right? I think we need to be very careful about that when we look at the space, especially relates to drainage and just our impacts on the overall watershed. Reducing the use of plastic materials. I think we all are getting better about that as a society, but it's something when we design play environments, we want to make sure that we're really conscious of. Maximizing use of natural materials and durable materials, whether that's sand or boulders or wood, trying to think about what can we include that's a natural material. And then for furniture, I know this might seem simple, but this is a lot of the things that we heard from you. And I think it's also just good practice and policy, but we need bike racks, right? We want to make sure we have dark sky compliant lighting. We don't want to overlight the space. We want to provide safe lighting, but we want to make sure that we're considerate of the dark sky compliant lighting, providing educational value and signage within the space, opportunities for art, trash and litter receptacles that can be maintained so we can make sure this is a beautiful space year round. And then from a planting design standpoint, we heard, right, we wanted to provide areas for passive recreational activities. I heard a few people talk about native and pollinator friendly gardens, opportunities for rain gardens, again, so very stormwater focused, I think. And then we want to preserve and enhance the existing tree canopy. I think we heard that loud and clear at the last meeting. And then we want to make sure we restore the use of the lawn space and maintain that ability to the practice field. Just a little bit of summary about where we are in the process, just of our own due diligence of the site. Whenever we do a project of this scale or magnitude, and for the park district, there's a couple kind of main field investigations that we need to conduct, and you may have seen this occurring over the past few months. But back in March, we did some geotechnical investigations. That's when they take a drill rig out into the site and they drill deep down and they figure out what the soil profile is, where the water table is, and all the other subsurface elements in a few locations, which is very important when you're engineering a site. So we did 4 borings at 15-foot deep and then some infiltration tests to see how well it drains in certain areas. In addition to that, we performed a topographic survey of the entire site and cataloged all the trees that are currently existing on site to make sure that we can accurately build this space. Overall, in the grand kind of schedule of this, or kind of where we're at here at the moment. So today is obviously June 21st here. We're at community meeting number 3. This summer, we'll be working on design development and submitting that. That's our next step as a design team. And then we'll be going to the consulting party review, which I think Sarah mentioned a little bit earlier. And we'll talk a little bit more at the end of the presentation. And that's to get the public feedback. And this is part of what we're doing right now, right? This public review period, making sure we're getting consistent feedback from the public. After that period, we have another community meeting scheduled for the fall, number 4. And then following that, IDOT and SHPO review in the fall, and then other community meeting as well. And that'll be the 5th community meeting in the fall. And then the goal is to wrap all of this up at the end of the year. So what are we doing for the design? We want to talk about that because I think it's the big thing that we talked about at the last meeting. We really want to show you some progress that we've been making as a design team. And we're getting pretty excited about where this is headed. And so let's dive right in. So as we talked about the design, we received a lot of great feedback, I think, on both concepts. And it was one of those things where you get a lot of good feedback on one, actually on both, and you kind of need to intertwine them a little bit. And so we took some of the options from the nodes concept, that concept too, and started to incorporate that into this this concept right here, the ribbons here. And the idea is we're providing these 3 interwoven paths, one through a sequential play experience that can be as linear, circular, or complex as one desires, right? So as many options as possible. And the goal within these spaces, and you kind of see within these colors here on the left, is to provide kind of 3 options, right? So we want this to be universally attainable, right? So a low sensory stimulus, maybe minimal physical exertion required, a path for everyone, 100% accessible. That's the blue. But as we talked in these previous meetings, it's not just about that when we talk about play spaces, right? We need to provide some level of challenge so that people can grow, right? And the users can grow. So in the orange, we're providing some level of physical challenge. We're starting to increase the sensory and the stimulus, and then try to get a little bit more active in terms of the energy level. And then finally, in the center of the space, we start to incorporate the pink ribbon. And that's where we're trying to really push these, what we talked about, acceptable risk, right? And so this is going to be the most physically challenging of the space, where we have a little bit more energy and movement. And then throughout this, we have a couple different nodes that kind of pepper the space and turn into unique play or gathering spaces within the design. So I don't expect you to read all the little numbers and all the labels on this plan, but I wanted to make sure we talked about the overall design first, and then we'll dive into smaller and more specific focused areas as we go through the design. But I think the first things first, we talked about in the previous framework plan that Sarah had mentioned, we want to restore the mixed-use trails that surround the park. That's something from an accessibility and a safety standpoint that's really important. So along the north and the south side. You may have seen out there on site today, some fencing was already up. I think that started some of the restoration work that's going to be happening along for the east side trail. So you saw that tree protection fence and that was already up, but that's not a part of what we're talking about today. In addition to that, we talked about preserving the landscape west of the north-south connector pathway that we'll be restoring, right? So we want to make sure that we're preserving that landscape in its place and removing invasive species kind of as needed within there. Also along the west side, we're talking about restoring the Cheney Good Memorial within there, and then really kind of creating this central lawn space that really kind of anchors the overall park. At the corners, we have ornamental plantings. The idea that we'll get into when we talk a little bit more about stormwater is that these are opportunities to provide native gardens and opportunities for water to infiltrate into the ground, right? We want to get as much stormwater infiltration into the ground as possible. And so we'll be kind of looking at native plantings that are maybe a little more formalized alignment, right? To be more in keeping with the historic geometry of the Midway within these spaces. So with that, we'll start to talk a little bit about the play space, but as I mentioned, we have the 3 pathways that help define the circulation within the space, and that's defined by essentially 3 nodes. So we have the gathering space here at number 6, and the center we have a little bit more of a creative musical space here in the center at number 12, and then at number 20 right here, we have the water node, as that's more of a generated water play space. I'll start walking into each of these spaces as we go through this. So as I mentioned, we want to restore the mixed use trail. We've all been out there, we've all seen the spaces. Things of the trails are definitely in need of TLC. So coming back, repaving these trails that surround the site. We want to make sure that we are showing or replacing the connector pathway, right? So this is the pathway looking right here. This is looking towards the south, past the Cheney Goodman Memorial. You can almost even see the outline. I know that some of the asphalt's still there. And so getting that restored connector pathway back within the space. We talked a lot about sensory gardens and different sensory elements within the design before. And so this is one of the first ones. What I wanted to do just as a moment of orientation for everyone. When you see up here at the blue box, we talked a little bit earlier about kind of the 3 pathways where we're trying to provide something that's universal or it's slightly challenging or the more higher speed things. That's where you'll start to see those keys here in the top left corner. So keep an eye out for that as we go through the presentation. But the idea here, right, as you enter the garden, right, we're providing to provide this kind of sensory smell area along this space, and to have the fragrant plants and a seating area. And so maybe we have some prairie dropsy, which smells like popcorn, or some other fun things within the space. As we start to work our way past that, the inclusion of a universally accessible swing. This is something that we've seen this being very accessible and a great opportunity for folks of all abilities to interact with here. So we'd have the universally accessible swing here at the north. As we work our way just past that, in the center of this kind of outside ribbon, we start providing this gathering space, right? So opportunities for parents or caregivers to sit under the shade, have some tables and chairs and opportunities to sit and gather, and while the visitors work through the space. We included some nature play elements, right? So maybe there's an opportunity for sensory taste. We don't encourage eating or playing around maybe with some of the materials, but maybe there's an opportunity for some taste within the garden here at the play kitchen. Just south of that, we're trying to be judicious to think about where we have planting, but isn't there an opportunity to have like a child's size scaled forest maze? So obviously not something that like we're talking about 20-foot tall evergreen trees, but something that's a little bit more kid-friendly, kid size. So you can still see into it from afar from a safety standpoint, but it provides the kids an opportunity to get lost within the environment and to test themselves. The next is, overhead structures, right? Providing this sense of scale within the environment. So we talked a little bit about the maze, but, the inclusion of an overhead arbor walkway so that we can grow and train vines up it. So you can have, different flowers going to different periods of time hanging down, but this opportunity to have this be wide enough and tall enough so that users of all ability, whether they're maybe wheelchair bound, can interact with the space just as much as anyone else as they walk through this. And then just to the west of that, right here at number 10, the sensory path. This is a really fun thing. We've seen a lot of different applications of this, right? But this one was actually built at a preschool, and what I think is so neat is they even took some of the perforated under drain pipe and put that on there. So even man-made materials within the sensory path, but stone and mulch and aggregate and like different things to feel the different elements as you walk under it is very beneficial in a space like this. Number 11, this idea of like this treetop adventure course. We want this one kind of big moment within the play space that can really serve as a beacon within the area, but also provide that like really big wow factor. And so something that's universally accessible has wheelchair access to the top, so you can get up and see, be within the trees, get a good opportunity to see all the areas around you, and survey before you maybe interact with the spaces. As we work our way just past that or just south of there, the inclusion of the musical node. And this can be something as simple as this top image right here, which is just like wood cut at different lengths. So then when you drag a stick across it, it provides a different sound. And so there's different ways to do this so that it can provide a unique experience for the visitors, and not be extremely loud. In addition to that, over here on the west, we talked about restoring the Cheney Good Memorial. This is actually a photo from the dedication, and you can see even in the black and white photo, obviously it wasn't painted black like it is right now, but just kind of the quality and the beauty of the space. And so bringing that back to the garden and really having that be the anchor within the space, kind of looking out over the play space. Just to the east of that, down a couple of feet of grade change, providing some level of overlook. And I don't think we're going to maybe necessarily have a shade sail, but the idea of being able to be up a little bit higher and see the pathways and how everything lays out within the space is something that's, we think, very important, and provides a little bit of opportunity to go up and down with the terrain. In addition, right here at number 15, the idea of looking at a shade structure, right? So whether that's, talk about maybe it's a shade sail like in the previous picture, or it could be something like this where it's open area, but it still provides some level of shade. And so a simple post and beam structure here with the warm wood purlins and pulling you through the space, something we think that could be very unique and exciting to the play space. Now we start getting a little bit more of the moderated challenges here, right? Which is pretty exciting, but providing some level of embankment slide on here. Maybe there's even opportunities to install some climbing pieces on the side of the slope so kids can climb back up to the top and not have to walk all the way around. So we talked about the climbing wall. So yeah, right here's another image of that. Different colors for different levels of difficulty to go bring you up and down the space adjacent to the embankment slide. And then just past that, this is where we get, I think, more of the riskier stuff, not risk, but more the challenging with this idea of having a ropes course. So maybe some challenging terrain below it that then kids can pull themselves up as they walk through the space and challenge themselves physically. I know this might not look like much with the flagstone pathway, but again, it is, right? Because it's not necessarily a true smooth surface. And so maybe providing a flagstone pathway to provide some level of moderated risk for someone that might be have some mobility issues is something that we think would be beneficial to the garden. And then we get to the third node, which is this water node, for lack of a better term at the moment. But what we think is really neat about this is this is all about being able to manipulate the landscape and provide cooperative play. And what's so fun about this, you look at this top image, right? The water play doesn't work unless you have multiple users, right? Someone closing the gate or someone turning the water on so you can manipulate it, right? So it's all about cooperation, communication. And so this is, again, something that within a play space like this, it's a great way to have something that's universally attainable, but also starts to push people to interact with each other within the space. And then providing opportunities that maybe are raised or at different levels for folks that might be have a mobility impairment so they can roll up to it. Just to the west of the water play area, providing this log beam network, right? So we want to incorporate some nature play. And this has the opportunity, right, to challenge your balance. Maybe some are a little bit further than you're comfortable with in your step. And so placing that here just west of that, and maybe some of those go uphill or through plantings is another great way to incorporate some nature play, but also some challenging elements within the space. Here at number 22, similar to we talked about with the sensory pathway, this is a little bit more challenging, but it's in a similar vein, right? So this rumble pathway, right? So again, it provides a little bit different of a texture or walking surface for visitors, and so they can challenge themselves as they walk across these spaces and experience different things from a texture and a surface standpoint. And then this is kind of the fun one. We've been doing a couple of these, and I think this is really where we start talking about incorporating play elements that people from different abilities and different stripes can use. But like how about a little bit of urban obstacle course? So maybe there's a couple, again, this is very similar to the logs steppers, but just that'll be a little bit taller of a height, maybe a tad more challenging, testing your balance and those fine and gross motor skills. And then finally, we have a few more sensory areas. And so this is the sound sensory area. And so looking at potentially including a neck climb or a seating element within the landscape, so you can really kind of get immersed within this and hear, the leaves rustling or the plants swaying in the breeze, right? So hear the sounds of the landscape within these areas. The idea of this meandering therapeutic garden where kids can kind of get lost in the space, but also providing the opportunities for maybe therapeutic plants or other native plants that have those kind of intrinsic benefits to them is something that we'd like to incorporate in the space. There's a lot of great native plants along those lines. And then, loose play. This is something that I think challenges everyone mentally, right? How can you build something creatively? What can we do? And so we've done this at a playground in McKinley Park where you can put some of these pieces together and build something and manipulate the environment around you. And then finally, again, trying to work on balance as you walk through the space, but providing maybe a hidden stone path, again, something that's maybe a little bit more of a moderated challenge within the space. And then additionally, I think this is one of our last sensory spaces, but working on our site and then maybe providing a butterfly garden. So we talked a little bit about pollinators, right? Trying to incorporate that within the space with certain select species within the garden. Couple more here as we work our way through it. We talked about tactile elements with on the ground, but maybe we can do that as well on sensory walls, right? Because we want to provide universal experience to everyone. So maybe not everyone can manipulate the elements on the ground. Maybe there's a sensory wall where we can do different things and manipulate things on a vertical surface. We mentioned earlier a little bit about restored ornamental plantings. So at the corners of the open lawn, one of the things we're trying to do is provide some ornamental landscape areas. And what's great about this, right? It has it's high performing landscape areas, right? What's so neat about this is that we can plant this in a more of a formalized planting aesthetic. So it'd be very much in keeping with the aesthetic of the Midway, but it can provide opportunities for pollinators. It can filter and let stormwater enter the ground, reducing the need for storm sewer piping. So it's got a lot of dual purpose and dual use landscape within these spaces. And that's something we want to incorporate at key locations around the garden. And then we have our central lawn space here in the center here at number 33. So providing this large lawn area that can be used for lots of different things, whether that's reading a book or maybe there's a athletic event or a practice that might happen out there as well. So I know that was a lot of information all at once. We have a couple more slides I just wanted to hit on because these were very specific things that you all had questions on last time we talked, and I want to go through this here, and then we can discuss any questions at the end. But specifically, we talked a little about safety and access to the center of the park. And so we've been kind of working on 5 things since our last meeting. And one of those is we've been meeting with CDOT and having this ongoing coordination to talk about providing an accessible vehicular drop off at the connector path. And so that's this piece in yellow. And so we're starting to explore how can we provide a drop off within this play space or within this area of the park to make it easier for parents or caregivers to drop people off close to the playground. We also have ongoing coordination with CDOT to look at providing safe and accessible crosswalks. And I know that there's a lot of ongoing work related to the Presidential Center for this, but making sure that we also have adequate signal timing with that, right? So folks can cross these crosswalks in a safe manner. We're also exploring the addition of mid-block crossings. I will say they're probably not going to end up in these 2 locations where they're shown. That was just more diagrammatic to make sure that we're following along with those. We're coordinating access to potentially get some accessible public parking at the public parking lots to the south at 60th and Stony Island. And then we're also exploring the possibility of including some on-street accessible parking. It's not something that's done very often within the city, so it's a little bit newer, but it's something that we think could be very important to explore and could be a really unique element to help address some of our needs here at the space. And then finally, stormwater. I think this is something that we really wanted to touch on as it relates to some of the flooding that we've seen in the area and some of the low-lying conditions. And so there's a few things that we're going to be doing related to the stormwater management of the space. I think the first is we really want to make sure that we're kind of respecting the general historic topography within the park. And what I mean by that is the general linear nature or symmetrical nature of the Midway, right? The balance within the space. As part of the agreement with the MOU, right, or the MOA, we want to make sure that we maximize usable lawn space, and part of what was required was a minimum of 30 by 50 yards. So make sure we have a nice large lawn here in the center. In addition to that, we're going to crown the lawn. I think that's a term that maybe some of you are familiar with, some maybe not, but the idea is that you start to put a gentle high point. So the idea is that we would put a gentle high point here in the center of the lawn space and direct the stormwater to the corners, right? We talked a little bit about earlier, these ornamental landscape areas would also kind of function as opportunities for stormwater infiltration. So start to direct the water to the corners, allow it to infiltrate into the soil. And then if that doesn't work, right, we include perforated stormwater piping to collect and infiltrate the water. And then if that doesn't work, then ultimately ends up in the city sewer. And the idea is that we want to make sure that we're minimizing, if not completely eliminating, I know which is lofty to eliminate, but we want to minimize at the very least the amount of water entering the city sewer system, right? Because that affects on-street flooding, it affects basement backups. So all of these techniques help to reduce that. And I think, ultimately recharge the water table and aquifers and things like that. So it's really kind of the best practice of how we can make sure that this is a manageable space, so a space that can be maintained and then also enjoyed year round. And then finally, all of this will meet city stormwater code requirements for detention and retention within the site. So with that, I know that was a lot. I think we're going to open it up for Q&A. I know, Sarah, you're going to help moderate some of this here for us. I think we have, looks like a fair amount of questions that have come through.
Yep, we sure do. So I'm going to, like we explained in the front of the meeting, I'm going to read these in order that they were received in the Q&A. We do have a few in the chat too, so I'm not going to miss those. And I just want to tell people, I know some folks weren't able to post their sign-in name publicly. So I tried to copy and paste everyone that wasn't showing up to everyone else in the chat. So hopefully we're reflecting everybody that's in the virtual room right now. And just to keep my sanity, I'm going to start with the questions from the chat and then go to the Q&A where it's a little easier for me to track. So bear with me. I'm going to scroll up a bit. I'm going to start with a comment from Ellen Ma. Ellen says, I'm concerned for the protection of the wetlands on the east end and implore that the project preserves this natural space. It is not only a green area important to low-income communities, but it is also a carbon sink essential to our environment. This development proposal ignores the necessity of this section of the Midway, and UPAR should not be funding the removal of such space on the south side. The wetlands is not easily replaced or transferred to other parks, and is much more needed by these disadvantaged and under-resourced communities than other neighborhoods. Thank you. I'm going to move to a series of questions. Next, from Ariel Hirschfeld. Ariel, first question, why have you chosen this site instead of other more needy and appropriate Southside locations? I'm going to read these kind of all in the row because they're all about site selection. And I think, Eilish, I'm going to call on you to address this in a minute here. So the first question, I'm going to repeat it. Why have you chosen this site instead of other more needy and appropriate Southside locations? When and how was the community asked about site choice? Why does Hyde Park continue to be the site for development when other Southside communities could have greater benefit from outdoor resources? Eilish, can you address site selection quickly? Or are you available?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks. So I just wanted to outline that the process for the site selection was part of the overall Section 106 and federal review process, which was very closely adhered to and monitored by federal agencies. The UPAR legislation, which has to do with recreation space, it outlines conversion requirements for affected public open spaces that may be part of a federal undertaking. It's also meant to assure the provision of adequate recreation properties and opportunities of reasonably equivalent usefulness and location. So when you look at the actual language in the UPAR legislation, they do talk about the location of any replacement space, and they put a preference on it, ideally serving the same community, which when you looked at that in one of that initial slide that showed the east end of the Midway and the footprint of the OPC project, the location of the east end of the Midway is essentially serving the same exact community of the space where the project is occurring. So that was a big reason why this location was identified. And as far as the wetlands, I'm not a wetlands expert, but I do know that the Army Corps of Engineer has maps of the entire coastline that includes places that are considered by that same federal agencies as wetlands. And I do not believe, but please, anyone else on the call who knows this, I do not believe that this area was identified as an official federal wetland.
Yeah, Alicia's correct. This is not technically a jurisdictional wetland at the federal level, but there was some mitigation required by the state of Illinois, and CDOT took care of that as part of an earlier real estate process having to do with the OPC development. So at this point, there is no requirement for us to mitigate for the wetland or otherwise protect the wetland on site. The last two questions, Ms. Hirschfeld submitted. This is wetland. Why have you chosen this notoriously difficult area to develop when other vacant lots abound on the south side? And finally, when are we as a community going to have a chance to express our opinion about the site choice? So to answer the first one, I would just say, Alicia, I think said it well, that the site selection was the outcome of an earlier process. This process is really executing the requirements of the MOA with the design review and development of a play space at the east end of the Midway. And for your last question, when are we as a community going to have our chance to express our opinion about the site choice? This is a forum certainly where you can come and we can have that discussion. We have people available on our panels to help address questions about it. But as far as opening up site selections for this particular process, as Alicia said, that was completed as an earlier part of the process. Heather, anything to add?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Heather Gleason again with the Chicago Park District. So Sarah and Eilish are both correct that the site selection was done as part of the federal review process. The agreements were signed with the federal government, and that includes having to re-sign the UPAR agreement with the United States Department of Interior. And some of that language does actually tell us that part of it is improving the drainage on the east side to provide improved space, approximately 30 by 50 yards for informal recreation. So as Sarah was explaining, or Eilish, I apologize if I've gotten you mixed up with what your comments were, but the UPAR process is looking at replacement of recreation space. And so part of the requirement in the UPAR agreement that was signed with the federal government includes improving the drainage and making it more usable for informal recreation. So that is something that we have to comply with as part of these federal agreements. I think what Rob has been trying to show you this evening, because we heard those comments about the wetland and we know that people really like the idea of having portions of the site remain natural, is that he was showing showing you those corners where we have a lot of natural plantings, where we're creating opportunities for pollinators and for birds and for nature to really come back and use the site's elements, like making sure that the stormwater is going towards those areas and other things to try to get that same effect that we think that you're looking for. We realize that you're not going to have the jurisdictional wetland, as Sarah explained, but those elements where we're adding that natural planting, making sure that we're taking nature and the sustainability of the site into account, I think is what we're trying to show you in the design this evening.
Thanks, Heather. I'll move on to the next comment. I'm sorry, this didn't go to everyone, but I'm going to copy and paste it in the panel right now. Christy Rawson says, 100% agree with Ellen Ma. We need to enhance the wetland, not work against it. By attempting to drain the wetlands, you're undermining a natural resource that represents an amazing opportunity for ecodiversity and environmental education. And that, I believe, concludes the comments that were added to the chat. So the Q&A is still open. If you want to submit written comments or questions to the Q&A, please do so. I'm going to start reading these in order. And I just want to mention, I saw in the Q&A, there's a question, when will audible questions be accepted? I'm going to get through this list and then we'll open the floor for anyone that's unable to use the Q&A for any reason to provide spoken comments. So please hang tight and we will open the floor in just a few minutes once we get through these questions. So Mr. Mark Lipinski submitted the very first comment. Ms. Tuffy mentioned that there were 97 consulting parties from the MOA, only 46 consulting parties signed. So a point of clarification there, I think, on the consulting parties. And just to clarify, when we do open our 45-day review period, we will be including the public, signatories, invited signatories, and concurring parties. So all 97, the big list, will be included in the 45-day review in addition to the general public. All right, next, a comment from Mr. Lodato. You can't reduce the use of hardscape materials and plastics by putting them where they don't already exist. Thank you for that comment. Next up, from Mr. Lodato again, this is a unique opportunity to improve environmental justice outcomes by putting a new recreation space in an underserved community like Woodlawn. Why are you ignoring the community's request that you put this where it belongs rather than in Hyde Park? So I think I at least covered kind of the process for site selection already. So I'm going to move forward with that one. If there's any more clarification that you need, please type a follow-up question in the Q&A. Another comment from Mr. Lodato. So the plan is to remove the wetland, then direct stormwater into the ground where you've just removed the water. Rob, can you talk again and clarify maybe the plan for stormwater management?
Yes, I can. I think related to the existing wetland area, I think part of what we're struggling with here within that space is we have an area that you would acceptably say is perched, right? It's not necessarily draining through, and so it creates a low-lying area that's generally prone to flooding. And within that space, it's a lot of it's not natural, it's a lot of turf species, right? It's lawn. And so what we're trying to do is provide a much more higher quality stormwater infiltration area. So that's what you want to call it, a rain garden or another name, but the opportunity to provide native vegetation that's designed and selected to work within wet environments, right? And so these would be plants that would thrive within wet spaces, that would flower, that would provide opportunities for pollination and habitat and everything else, and truly be, I think, ultimately the space that I think we'd all like a wetland to look like, right? And it's going to have a little bit much higher of an aesthetic value, while then still providing the opportunity for this centralized lawn space. So I think that's kind of the ultimate goal of this, is really trying to make the space function better and provide a much higher quality environment for this stormwater infiltration, which is essentially what this wetland should provide.
Thanks, Rob. Next up, from Ms. Christy Rawson, you mentioned the noise of Metro, pretty friendly. You did not mention the noise from the freight trains, not as friendly, not at all friendly. The playground equipment will shake when the freight train passes. I live here, our building shakes. They are not as frequent as the Metro, but they pass several times a day. Thank you. That's good input that we'll take into consideration. Next comment, I agree with Ray Lodato. It seems there is a lack of understanding with the space in terms of where and how the water exists and collects. Mr. Lipinski, the presentation of facts concerning the consulting parties is incomplete. If the 97 consulting parties figure, which could also be found on review of the MOA, is mentioned, well, 46 signatories figure is omitted. And we can absolutely clarify that in future presentations. Thank you for pointing that out. Is the drawing of the play structures to scale relative to the rest of the eastern panel of the Midway? Yes, it is drawn to scale. What is the intended use of the musical node? I hope it won't be another place where people gather to play amplified music, something which already makes summer evenings unbearable for those who live near here. Rob, can you talk a little bit more about that?
No amplification. It is meant to be as DIY and friendly as possible. So, potentially what we talked about a little bit earlier was wood elements that were potentially cut at different lengths so that when you strike them, they would create a different tone, right? So something that's not going to reverberate or travel a great distance. It's not going to be amplified. This is about smaller children playing something, trying to make a Mary Had a Little Lamb or something like that within the space and manipulating it, but definitely not outdoor concerts or things of that nature where we'd have amplification and large scale instruments.
Thank you. Another from Elena Bescher. Your plan shows a large number of very specific things to be made. I hope you won't make it cluttered with too much stuff. We'll keep that in mind. Absolutely. All right, next up, regarding the MOA, please note the UPAR calls for a community process to identify replacement site before. No opportunity was granted to community to look at the constellation of areas in need of parkland investments prior to codifying site in the MOA. The incorrect selection of the Midway results in net loss of park space to the south side communities by concentrating $3 million in Hyde Park, adjacent park, muscling out other south side communities. Removal of wetland takes away carbon sequestration, inflicting environmental justice at a time where concrete increased traffic congestion and lost trees are increasing heat and associated health risks. Thank you. Next comment. You mentioned that your plan seeks to promote tree and wild landscaping. However, your plans for the playground seem to involve much concrete. Concrete is a notorious contributor to carbon emissions and additionally attracts heat to nearby environment. Please explain how you will actually promote native wildlife, carbon sequestration, and urban park spaces while you are really replacing natural greenery with trees and concrete. Rob, can you speak to this?
Yeah, I would just speaking to the concrete. I think there's a couple different things as designers that we can do for the environment, specifically to that material. So the past couple of years, there have been tools that have been developed specifically for site development that provide some level of feedback as you're designing about how much carbon you are potentially expelling. And so thinking about different concrete mixes that have a high fly ash content so that you can encapsulate that within the concrete is one way. Providing concrete that is high albedo, right? So it's a little bit brighter than a typical concrete so that it reflects the rays of the sun and reduces urban heat island effect. So I think there's a few different ways that we can still use concrete, which is a very sustainable and resilient material that doesn't need to be replaced very often or as often as other materials within the park space while still respecting environmental pieces. And that also goes to the stormwater strategy, right? So using that resilient pavement to direct water into these other areas, we can allow it to infiltrate. So yeah, carbon is, when we talk about these elements, it's a very hard thing to reconcile, but it's something that I think that through thoughtful design, incorporation of natural landscapes and natural materials, that it's something that we can really do our best to address within the play space.
Hey, Rob, before we go on, I just wanted to add as well that one of the things that we're trying to balance here, as you probably heard us say, is that we're trying to make this very inclusive for everyone. So one of the other reasons why we have to include some hardscape is that if you're in a wheelchair, getting through the grass is not an easy proposition. So we need to make this space not just ADA compliant, but really welcoming to people of all different mobilities. And so I love that, Rob is thinking about all of these different ways that we can do both, where we can capture carbon and we're not contributing to urban heat island and all of those things. And also, I mean, we did not give the designers an easy task here. They've got to think all these elements and make sure that people from all different walks of life can use this space and feel welcome and comfortable. So just wanted to make sure we caught that as well.
Thank you. A comment from Jacqueline Mullick. I agree with both Ray Lodato and Christy Rawson regarding the removal of the wetland and then directing stormwater into that very ground where the water was removed. How does that make sense? And I think this is just a function of the requirement to provide the 30-yard by 50-yard usable turf space at the east end of the site. So we're trying to keep that area open and usable while maintaining space for stormwater management at the edges of the site. Next comment, I agree with Elena Tiden's comment, and please answer her question. That was 2 questions before where we talked about carbon sequestration, how we're promoting wildlife and urban park spaces in light of the new concrete. So I think we've answered that sufficiently for now, but please do add a follow-up question if you have anything else you're curious about. Another from Christy Rawson. Will we get a chance to ask our questions audibly? Oh, yes, I think I mentioned that. We'll do that in a few minutes here once we get through the written questions. Kate Thompson, what about a wetlands? And what about MPAC's plan? Their perspective should be respected. Mark Lipinski, is it currently planned that some part of the stormwater from the eastern panel of the Midway is directed into the sewer system? Our plan will comply with the City of Chicago Stormwater Ordinance, which has requirements for detention and retention on site. Rob, do you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, and just to reiterate before, I think the goal is to, obviously we're going to have to detain and retain per all the city requirements. The goal is to minimize to the greatest degree possible any water entering the City of Chicago sewer system. This is a natural space. This is open space. We shouldn't be contributing to the city sewer system in any sort of combined sewer events or, flooding that might occur. We are trying to infiltrate as much water as we possibly can and delay it from entering that sewer system.
Thank you. Next comment from Ariel Hirschfeld. I agree with Ellen. This development proposal ignores the natural resource that already exists. From Mark Lipinski, there is a NEPA study identifying the eastern end of the Midway as a wetland on the city's website. Thanks for pointing that out. We can check that out. Next question from Bronwyn Nichols Lodato. Why is there a proposal to move the wetland if it doesn't exist? So I think we explained that although it's not current, or it wasn't at the time considered a federally jurisdictional wetland, there was a requirement by the state. There was a requirement by the state that required mitigation. And so CDOT took care of that mitigation through wetland credits, I believe, as part of a previous phase of the project. Christy Rawson, next up. What you said about the wetland is not accurate. It was identified as a wetland by the federal government. It was not required by the feds to protect it. Given that we're talking about either the Obama administration, conflict of interest, or the Trump administration doesn't care about the environment, and don't think you can point to the feds' lack of requiring protection as the act of disinterested parties.
Hey, Sarah, can I say something real quick?
Sure.
So I know a lot of folks are focused on the wetland, and I will get some data here, I hope, from some of our natural resources team. The Park District does tons of acreage of natural plantings. In fact, there's a huge project that was done with the federal government, the Glypher project in Jackson Park, directly across from Cornell, which as part of the Obama Foundation work, when we're removing that Cornell piece and connecting the park, there will even be more easy access to get to the Jackson Glypher project, where we have dozens and dozens of natural plantings and we monitor them very carefully. So I'm not trying to say that your comments are absolutely welcome, but it's a little bit difficult because we do at the Park District focus so much on natural areas, but we do have to balance. We don't have the ability to just put natural plantings everywhere because we have folks who want to do recreation, and this space has also been used in the past for informal soccer practice and football practice. And that is also partly, I believe, what they were trying to balance in the federal government's, requirement that we make it more usable for informal recreation, because there was some recreation elements that were being taken away as part of the park space that the Obama Foundation was occupying. So it's not easy, and we try to do the best we can. There's going to constantly be people who look at spaces and want to see them either all natural or want to be all recreation. And we do the best we can at the Park District to balance all of those interests and try to provide multiple different ways for people to enjoy open space. And I just wanted to make that comment because we do have a really, really big natural area in Jackson Park, very close to this site as well, where we have focused very much on natural plantings and making sure that we're protecting bobolink meadow and migratory bird patterns and that sort of thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Next question or next comment by Mark Lipinski. The MOA expressly provides for amendment. The amendment provision of the MOA is an opportunity to correct the error in excluding the public from the site selection process. And I think we also discussed this a little bit at the Midway PAC meeting. From Bronwyn Nichols Lodato, agree with Mr. Lipinski, amend the MOA. Next up, a question from Jacqueline Mullick. I got on this meeting late. Are any trees being cut down as part of this process? Rob?
We are not planning any at this moment. We're going to try to preserve and enhance the tree canopy as much as possible. I believe there's one tree out there that's already dead or it's about to pass. So we might have to remove one, but no, we're not removing trees.
Thank you. From Grace Sue, I agree with Ellen and Elena as well. Draining the wetlands and using materials that attract heat, especially with increasing temperatures and heat waves, is getting rid of critical natural resources and landscapes. From Dean Armstrong, the design looks nice, and I think the swales on the outside of the main lawn are a good choice in including the existing water. From Renata Gokul, ironically, this new recreational opportunity is taking away the existing recreation that currently exists on site, such as soccer, basketball, or soccer, baseball, frisbee. That domed lawn won't allow for that kind of activity. The community has lost net parkland by placing a park within a park.
Can I just say something about the domed lawn part? So when I mentioned a crowned field, that is like you would see on any athletic field. So even if you go to Soldier Field today, there's a slight crown to it, right, to provide drainage to the edges. It's one of those things when you look at it, it's imperceivable, but it is there and it does allow the space to drain appropriately. So when we go out there, if this plan comes to fruition, if you stand there, you're not going to see this big dome-like structure. It's going to be very, very subtle to allow the water to drain appropriately.
Thanks for the clarification. From Ray Lodato, you can't guarantee that the Park District won't issue permits for amplified music at some point. From Bronwyn Nichols Lodato, great comment, Renata. I'm in agreement. That was regarding the park within a park. From Elena Basher, the gathering space, as shown on your slide, looks like it is paved. Doesn't this contradict your commitment to not use concrete?
No, we're going to have paved spaces. I think we addressed that a little bit earlier. We need to have paved spaces to meet accessibility codes and provide, firm, stable, slip-resistant walkways within the playground and within the gathering spaces. Some of these spaces might have a crushed pavement just to provide a little bit of a different material and will offer stormwater infiltration, but there will be paved spaces within this. And a gathering space would probably have some level of concrete to it so that we can have wheelchair users sit and enjoy the shade along with other users.
Thank you. Next from Bronwyn, I'm concerned that other communities on the south side, particularly those that have residents with mobility challenges, will not have use of these funds to create accessible park space in communities that have none. Please note that this is also in keeping with the purpose of UPAR in the first place, to create recreational spaces in urban communities where none exist. Next question from Anonymous. Do you have any examples of sites you've designed that incorporate this many elements? Rob? Oh, you're on mute, Rob. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Yeah, we've done quite a number of playgrounds through the city of Chicago for the Chicago Park District that have, varying levels of complexity in different areas within the city. Which is a couple, like one that was recently done for the Park District up was at Seneca Park, which had quite a bit of different elements related to it and its complexity. We worked on Mary Bartolome Park in the West Loop and other areas within the south side of Chicago. We worked on a children's garden and healing garden just nearby here over at the University of Chicago at the Comer Children's Hospital that had quite a few events in a very small space and was very accessible and honestly designed for folks that may be in a gurney or bedridden. So yes, we've done plenty of projects where we have lots of different events. And I honestly, I want to say I really appreciate the comment that someone made earlier about being careful about clutter. I think that's something as designers that we'll strive to do is to not make sure that we clutter the site up. But yeah, we've done many playground spaces and parks with varying levels of complexity.
Thank you. From Michael McNamee, the 2 new corner plantings on the east edge could be designed as small replacement wetlands to very slowly infiltrate rainwater using plantings that depend on wet ground. Thank you for that comment. Next, a question from Melina Bisher and Dave Miller. We have a special guest tonight, Dave Miller from CDOT. Dave, maybe Alina's wondering, what do we mean by mitigation of the wetland? Is this something that you're able to address in further detail?
Yes, so like this was part of the, can you hear me?
Yep, thank you.
So this is part of, as part of the Jackson Park Mobility Improvements Project that CDOT is leading. Some of these mitigations happen through land banks in the wetland banks in the region. So basically by purchasing credits in wetland banks for other regional wetlands to mitigate, based on the requirements of the state. So that's what CDOT did as part of the phase 1 for initial improvements in Jackson Park.
Thanks, Dave. Next up from Mary Anton, the majority of people challenging this project on Q&A are MPAC members who are clearly making the case they previously made meeting with Sarah and Heather. Their arguments preclude the range of improvements that this project brings to the part of the Midway, which is heavily used for recreational sports, when the field is not flooded and covered with geese. Also ignores that the underserved communities they speak about sit across the street from the site. At the public meeting, several residents of Woodlawn voiced their support and excitement for having this park in their backyard. From Ariel Hirschfeld, it is fairly clear that the community members here have concerns about the site choice and the way it's being developed, though it doesn't seem like the park district or other developers are prepared to be flexible or make any changes to their plans. Is there any intention to adapt this plan in any way based on community input, or is this just an FYI meeting? Heather, can you address this one?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the comments about site selection, it's true. We do not have the flexibility to move the site. And that is not because the park district isn't willing to be flexible. It is because we are under federal agreements to do this project at this space. So it is not that we are not listening to the community. We are trying to incorporate as many comments into the design as we possibly can. But the idea of not doing this project and moving it to another site is not an option to the Chicago Park District or the city of Chicago. We are under these federal agreements that require us to improve this space as part of the overall federal process that we all went through with the Obama Foundation. So I understand where you're coming from, but we do not have the option to say we're not doing the project because we have all these federal agreements that have been signed.
Sarah, you're on mute.
Pardon me. First of all, I had a copy and paste error in the chat. I apologize. I pasted one comment twice and I reflected incorrectly Louise McCurry's comment. So please note that if you're looking at the chat, that's been corrected. But moving through with the Q&A, also just a reminder, please submit your questions and comments in the Q&A because this is the easiest way for us to kind of move sequentially in the meeting. Next up, Christy Rawson submits, Heather, I would take your concerns for natural plantings and preserving trees much more seriously if I was assured that the PGA golf course was off the table. Next comment from Michael McNamee. I support maximizing the use of natural materials as indicated in one of the opening slides. Thank you for the comment. From Mark Lipinski, this project has 3 components: the design of play equipment, the construction of play equipment, and the drainage of wetland. What are the estimated costs of these components? For each of these components, has funding been secured? Rob, can you answer the first part of the question about costs, and then
Yeah.
Heather, can I pass you about funding?
So costs are very interesting right now. I think we have all noticed the levels of inflation and rising construction costs and things of that nature within the marketplace, especially in the past 6 months, but in the past year. So the project budget is $3 million, and we will be building a $3 million project. Currently, we're probably a little bit over budget, but I think that's to be expected as we go through the design process. And we're going to be continuing to work towards that, and we will be building a $3 million project. Hopefully, inflation and construction costs start to level out by the time construction starts. But that's just the hand that we're dealt at the moment. So that's something that we're actively working on. We track construction indices to make sure that we're accounting for escalation, which is essentially a fancy word for inflation for construction, and making sure that we prepare ourselves to meet that $3 million budget.
Thanks.
Meg?
And Heather, can you talk about funding? Yep.
Yep, sorry, I jumped in on you there. Yes, Mark, you asked that same question. We went out to the Midway PAC meeting, and we do not yet have full funding secured. We are working with the city of Chicago. We are diligently working with the city of Chicago to find those funds. But we do have the money to get through this design process, which is part of what is required under the federal agreement. So as soon as I know more details on that at one of our subsequent meetings, we will certainly report out.
Thank you. Next comment from Bronwyn Nichols Lodato. She's just, I think, in response to a previous comment, reminding folks that this is a public forum and everyone is welcome to comment, and please resist the urge to impugn MPAC. Next from Ray Lodato, a federal agreement is not set in stone. As others have said, the MOA allows for amendment, which is what the community is asking for. From Kate Thompson, I share the concerns others have expressed about the site selection. Unfortunately, I think there is a reason why this site was chosen. It is not really for the community. It is meant to connect with the OPC. It is the first thing tourists will see when they get off the Metro. Even though it is technically still a city park, it is actually another land grab by the Obama Foundation. Next, oh, I'm sorry. I'm just clarifying. I will read all of the comments and questions, the rest in the chat, but I'm gonna move through the questions that are in the Q&A first. And if you have further questions, please put them in the Q&A. But before we wrap up, I will read any outstanding questions that are in the chat. From Susan, from Susan Avila. I think communities across Chicago need more ways to gain confidence in the Chicago Park District, especially with the current closing and fencing off of Douglas Park. Please look for ways to demonstrate commitment to including the communities in these decisions. From Jacqueline Mullick, thank you, Bronwyn Nichols Lodato. I take offense when somebody makes a condescending remark about MPAC members. I appreciate you standing up for everyone's right to express their comments. And then let's see, from Christy Rawson, Kate is spot on. It's a land grab by the Obama Foundation, hence the federal review. Okay, I'm moving back to the chat now. I'm going to read the remaining questions in the chat, and then we will open the floor to spoken comments. But please allow me to read the remaining questions in the chat before we proceed to spoken comments. All right, the first is, what effects will this natural play space have for the children and adults who use the space? Rob, can you address this one?
I think it's going to have a great effect and a great impact. It's going to provide some unique recreational opportunities and opportunities to learn and challenge themselves, and opportunities for them to interact with their parents, their caregivers, multi-generational families within the space. It'll provide opportunities for seating within the park space. I think that's something that's sorely missing currently within the current condition and layout of the park space. So I think it's going to have a wonderful impact on the neighboring children and seniors within the neighborhood.
Thank you. Next question from Louise McCurry. What has been the effect of these natural accessible play spaces on communities around the country who have these amenities? Rob, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think the effect's been fantastic. Any opportunity you can to have children and different folks interact with their environment, interact with natural areas is something that has shown to be a huge benefit, just emotionally, mentally, physically. Getting outside, interacting with natural areas is a huge benefit. We've done playground spaces like this throughout the city and throughout the suburbs, and there's been playgrounds regionally and nationally, and they have been quite successful for their surrounding communities.
Thanks, Rob. How can seniors benefit from this natural space and sensory garden?
So I think there are a couple ways. That's actually kind of an interesting thing to think about. We showed a lot of these elements and we're talking about children a lot of times, but again, this is something that can also be multi-generational. You start thinking about people that are mobility impaired. You could have a senior, someone that's in their older years, maybe want to walk down the rumble path or maybe challenge themselves in an odd way, maybe when there's no one in the park, just to maybe test their strength. So I think there's opportunities for folks to use that. I think there's opportunities for seating. I think there's opportunities for seniors to go out maybe with younger family members. Maybe they have a grandson or a granddaughter that maybe has one of these issues that we're trying to address. I think it's a great opportunity for seniors to be involved within the space.
Thank you. And last but not least, what is the effect of the sensory garden and the butterfly garden? What effect will those gardens have on the park space?
I think it's going to have two effects, right? It's going to be a direct visual link to understanding how the pollinator gardens work, right? You're going to see the pollination happening right there. And so I think that's one thing that it's going to help from a native garden and native landscaping approach, but it's also going to provide kind of just like some basic understanding of how natural systems work that I think is always beneficial to educate the public about.
Thank you. And will seniors with Alzheimer's and cognitive deficits benefit from the play space?
I am probably not qualified to make that judgment, but I think it's something that could be explored. I've never worked on a garden designed or a place-based design environment like that in a public park, but I'm not sure.
Maybe we could follow up on that for the next
Yeah.
one. We can do a little look into that. All right, so I've reached the end of the written comments. So we would like to now allow an opportunity for spoken comments. Rob, can you give us an overview of how that will work?
Yeah, so we have two hands that are raised currently, and I'm going to click this button that should allow you to talk, and I have a couple more popping up. So let me try, hopefully this works. So we'll start off with Robin Kaufman. So I'm going to click this button and hopefully you'll be able to talk. You might have to unmute yourself on your end, on your computer. Let me see.
I see Robin on the panel display now. Robin, can you unmute yourself? Are you there? Sophia, can you try to send Robin a message through the chat?
I'm going to try one more thing,
Okay.
Sarah. Hold
Help
on, I got
them
an idea.
out.
Yeah, that's not working. Let me try. We'll try. There's a Christy here, Christy Rawson. Let's try you next.
Christy, yeah, Christy, if you,
I just unmuted. Hi, can you hear me?
yeah,
Oh,
perfect.
yeah. Awesome.
Okay, great. I also just texted Robin because I actually know Robin, so maybe she'll.
Oh,
just-
beautiful.
Thank you. I'm glad this worked. Sorry.
So you've heard from me before, and I could talk about the benefits of that naturally occurring wetland as it already exists, telling blue in the face. I'm really I'm really upset about this mowed lawn aesthetic that the park seems to think that it needs to ascribe to yet another portion of Midway, because the entire Midway is already mowed lawn. So I don't understand why we need to drain a half an acre on the easternmost end to have more mowed lawn. So, but that's actually because you've heard so much from me about that and so much from other people, I think that our position is understood. What I want to bring up is something that I've heard less about, actually nothing at all about, which is what I mentioned in the chat about the freight trains. I live across the street from this site. I live in the building closest to the train tracks. They are loud. When I'm on my back porch, talking to my neighbor, I mean, I like where I live. I have a really beautiful treescape between me and the tracks, and it's really lovely. There's lots of birds, and so we all put up with the train tracks, but we also don't go outside to play next to them. And they are incredibly loud. You cannot have a conversation with someone when the freight trains go by. The building shakes. My cat runs for cover. It's an extremely disruptive situation. If you're out there playing and you don't know a freight train is coming, it comes really fast, barreling through, no warning, and it scares people. It scares people who have sensory sensitivity. And I feel like I really want to applaud the designers. I mean, I think I recognize that you guys have just done a terrific job with what you're handed, and I really appreciate your attention and your response to so many, so much input that's come your way. And so this is, I'm not disparaging in any way the work that's gone towards this, but I just feel like I'm not sure people have spent that much time there. I live right next to this area. I know exactly what happens. I sit in that memorial bench often when I, want to get out of my house and sit across the street with a nice quiet Midway. So between the busy streets on three sides, Stony Island's going to get busier. The express portion of 59th Street that doesn't have stop signs is where all the ambulances go. They go really quickly. If you're not going to fence that in, it doesn't feel safe or appropriate for a play space like this when you've got three busy streets and a freight train. I really do believe that the site was chosen because it's directly in front of the Obama Center, and I do believe that that's why they want to control this block. And I don't think it's an appropriate place for it. I'm not saying this because I don't want kids across the street from me. I welcome kids across the street from me. I really think people need to understand the disruptive element that the freight trains will cause for kids that are out there playing. I'm not joking when I say whatever you put there, whatever equipment you put there, it will shake, and that will change people's experience of the site. And I don't think people realize that.
Unmute Sarah.
Thanks, Christy. Robin, can we try to get you unmuted again? All right. Robin, please do submit anything you'd like to say in Q&A if this just isn't working. Otherwise, Robin is kind of working on it. Is there anybody else with their hand up? There's
one more phone number, and this is the trickiest tech support thing we do. So again, everyone, thank you for your patience. When I went to design school, this is something that was not taught. So the 773 phone number.
Hello.
There you go.
Yeah, this is Gary Osaward, and I would want to say that even if, and over the years, if the Obama site were not across from it, I would still want some improvement to this area. And I think you've done a thoughtful look at what to do with the water and not over and replace at least some of the lawn with something different there too that children and all elders can enjoy. It's difficult to solve the problems, including the noise. And let's always remember that the Midway there coming at Stony Island is a node a place where neighborhoods meet, highways meet, ways of getting across, bicyclists and everything. This is a combined area there. And it's as much Woodlawn as it is Hyde Park, regardless of who controls what organizations. We all need to work together on this and be accommodating to each other without certainly going overboard on things. So I hope that instead of just using this to beat up on each other, we can use this to try see if we can do a better good. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, looks like Robin is on mute. Rob, anybody else with their hand up to submit a spoken comment?
We have one more person, and then we'll move on. We have Luis is on here, and I just unmuted you, so please chime in if
Hey,
you
Luis.
can.
Good. So I just want to be the person who does spend time on that part of the Midway. I spent 30 years coaching youth soccer there. It's a place that children love. They catch lightning bugs. They play with butterflies. They chase caterpillars. They check out the trees. It's a wonderful, wonderful place for children. We have a chance to educate them about the story of the women's movement to get the right to vote. If we look at the Cheney bench, it's an opportunity to talk about transportation as we look at the trains that go through and talk about them. Kids have been playing there for as long as I've been coaching soccer, which has been since 1986. And it's been a place that kids 3 years old, 5 years old, up to 19-year-old have played. Does it get wet sometimes when there's a lot of rain? Absolutely. And we give everybody a bucket. They clean out the wet spaces, and then it's dry again. It's not a wetland. It's a low area that, in fact, gets wet when it rains. It's a wonderful space for families. Families come and sit on the benches around the area and talk to each other and have cookouts, have an opportunity to have picnics. It's absolutely the perfect place because it brings together the families of Woodlawn, the families of South Shore, and the families of Hyde Park, an area that's open and accessible to all. To make it an accessible place, I've worked with multiple children with various developmental disabilities throughout my years in AYSO, and the opportunity for a place where they have their own play space, where they can make their developmental disabilities an advantage as they learn different ways to play and different ways to grow, is an asset to our community. It's going to make Hyde Park become that community that cares about children. And that will become loud and clear as they see this amazing playground. So I'm looking forward to having this wonderful new space so our kids can grow. We're old. We won't be around a lot longer, but our kids will be here for a long time. And other than playing soccer there or playing football there, it's a wonderful place for kids to go and explore and enjoy. And I look forward to the plan the Park District has for making that exploration space a place for our children, not us, but our children to grow and experience and have a wonderful life. And I sincerely hope we can make it happen quickly. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Do you want to move on through the next steps?
Sure. Robin, last call. I'm sorry. Sorry we couldn't get you unmuted, but please, if you're able to. All right, we're moving on to next steps. Thank you very much. So similar to what we spoke about last time, we will incorporate feedback that we've gathered during this meeting and reflect it in the next iteration of our design. And we will use the information to kind of move the plans forward. Most of you are probably familiar with our project webpage on the Featured Capital Projects website. That is still up there. We are still updating it. We will provide a recording of this meeting in the next week or two. Give us a little time, but we will send an email around to let people know when it's posted. There's also our feedback form online. If you think of something tonight or tomorrow and you want to send it in, please, we're always accepting comments here. This is also how you sign up to be on our contact list. So please make good use of that. Next steps, we went over this at the front of the meeting. We will be starting our consulting party review. So as I mentioned, that is a public review, and it is also an opportunity for signatories, invited signatories, and concurring parties to comment on the plan. So the version of the plan that will be available for consulting party review will be a refined version of the plan that we shared tonight, updated to incorporate comments that we heard here at this meeting. Like I said earlier, we will be meeting with our federal partners this week to sharpen our pencils on the process for that consulting party review. But we will communicate with all of you via our email list to let you know when the plan is available and when the official comment period opens. We anticipate it will be in early July. That will be a 45-day process through the end of September. We think we will be back with you all in September for our next community meeting. And at that meeting, we will share comments received through the consulting party review process and an updated plan in anticipation of the final SHPO review and preparation of construction documents. So we will be in communication as soon as possible on the date for that meeting. Right now, we intend to host that as an in-person meeting. So we're going to alternate in-person and virtual meetings, I think. That's been a good rhythm for us. So stay tuned for more details on that. And then per the MOA, we're still following the schedule. We're still on track to complete construction by the fourth quarter of 2023. And I want to extend a big thank you to everybody for showing up on this warm but kind of lovely summer night and taking time to give us your feedback. We do appreciate it. Stay in touch via the comment form, and you will be hearing from us on next steps for the for the consulting party review process very shortly. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening.